He's watching everything through cameras, even what happens when we think no one's looking. The words tore out of Mia Voss before she could stop them, her voice barely a whisper, shattered like glass in the silence of the Mountain Lodge security room. Nicholas Bianchi stood motionless before a wall of monitors, 23 screens casting blue light across his face like the glow of something burning from inside. The blizzard howled against the reinforced windows behind him, snow so thick the world beyond had disappeared completely, erased as if it had never existed at all. In the corner, a fireplace crackled, orange flames throwing shadows that danced across his jaw, across the scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone, a permanent map of a violence he did not speak about. On Monitor 7, Mia stood in her black and white maid uniform between 3 armed men and a kitchen worker so terrified she had stopped breathing. The men wore suits that cost more than everything Mia owned. Their hands rested on weapons. Their eyes held the kind of cold that came from having done unspeakable things and forgotten about it by breakfast. But Mia did not move. Her cleaning bucket hung from one trembling hand. And her voice, steady despite hands shaking so hard the metal rim rattled, cut through the tension like a blade through air. Leave her alone. She has done nothing to you. 3 men. 1 maid. One small act of stepping in front of danger because someone weaker needed protection. Sergio and Luca stood behind their boss, confusion written across their faces. They had been discussing the Seattle shipment, 30 containers, offshore accounts, a rival family's attempt to muscle into territory that had belonged to the Bianchis for 40 years. Important business. Life and death business. But Nicholas had frozen mid-sentence. His knuckles white against the mahogany desk. His eyes locked on that single screen showing a woman he had never noticed, invisible among the household staff for exactly 2 weeks, choosing courage when everything in her life had taught her to choose survival. "Who is she?" he asked without turning. His voice came out like thunder, deep and solid like an oath carved into stone. Sergio checked the employment roster. Mia Voss. Hired 3 weeks ago. Cleans the West Wing and kitchen. Keeps her head down. Never speaks unless spoken to. References checked out. Background clean. No priors, no debt, no family complications. No priors. No debt. No family. Just a woman with a cleaning bucket and $5 in her pocket, which was exactly what she had left after paying the deposit to rent a room the size of a closet for blocks from here. But what Nicholas did not know, what none of his men could possibly understand standing in that warm security room with its crackling fireplace and walls of monitors showing every hidden corner of his world, was that the courage he witnessed on that screen would force him to choose between the walls he had built over 28 years and the loyalty he thought he had lost forever when his own brother betrayed the family to save his skin. On Monitor 12, 8-year-old Emma sat in the library, her small fingers moving across raised dots of braille, her head tilted in concentration. Blind since birth. Growing up in a world she could not see, hearing only darkness and voices. Emma, the reason he had installed these cameras in the first place. 23 hidden feeds throughout the property, a network of glass eyes watching every hallway, every room, every shadow that might pose a threat to the one person in this world he could not protect through firepower alone. Power lived in this room. Absolute power. But behind that wall of screens, the most feared Mafia boss in Seattle stood helpless, watching a penniless maid with everything to lose step directly into danger for someone weaker than herself. Footsteps approached. Measured, unhurried. A man in his 60s pushed open the security room door without knocking because he had earned the right to enter anywhere without permission. Victoria Ashford's personal security chief, sent to retrieve something that had apparently gone missing from the lodge. Douglas Hale. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a charcoal suit that hung perfectly on a frame built from decades of violence. His hair silver at the temples. His eyes the color of winter water. On his wrist, a Rolex that caught the light. On his left hand, a gold ring with a black stone. He smiled when he saw Nicholas, but the smile never reached his eyes. "The West Wing is secure." "Everything is secure," Nicholas said, still watching the monitors. Still watching Mia. "Good." Because Victoria is very interested in making sure nothing interferes with her business arrangements. Very interested indeed. He gestured toward Monitor 7, where Mia stood with her hands at her sides, unafraid now that the men had lowered their weapons. That one. The maid. She's causing complications. Nicholas turned then. Slowly. His full attention shifted like a spotlight finding its target. The scar on his face seemed to darken. What kind of complications? The kind that interferes with Victoria's associates. The kind that remembers things she shouldn't remember. The kind that needs to be reminded of what happens to people who forget their place. Hale's voice dripped with the casual cruelty of a man who measured human worth in usefulness and disposal. Victoria wants her back. Says she was property. Says property doesn't get to simply walk away. The security room went absolutely still. The only sound was the blizzard pressing against the windows and Sergio's sharp intake of breath. Nicholas Bianchi did not move. His hands remained at his sides. His breathing did not change. But something cold and dangerous stirred in his chest, something that had been sleeping since the night his brother packed a bag and disappeared with the family secrets and a federal prosecutor's protection. No. Excuse me. I said no. She stays. She is under my protection now. And anyone who comes for her comes through me. The words fell from his mouth like stones into still water, each one final, each one irreversible. You can tell Victoria that the mountain lodge is off limits. Her business, her women, her arrangements, none of it happens here. Not anymore. Hale laughed. It was the sound of a man unused to hearing the word no. The sound of someone who believed power existed only in his own hands. You would start a war over a maid? Over nothing? I would start a war over less, Nicholas said. And he meant it. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming tomorrow. We're about to step back in time and show you how Mia Voss arrived at this mountain lodge with nothing but an eviction notice and the weight of 8 years of hidden scars. Now, let us go back to the beginning, to 48 hours before Nicholas Bianchi watched her on those screens, to the moment everything changed direction and started moving toward this moment, toward this choice. The red ink on the eviction notice had bled slightly where her tears had fallen. December 10th, 12 days. After 12 days, she would have no place to sleep, no address to call home, no shelter from the Seattle winter that was already turning vicious with cold. Mia Voss sat on the edge of her mattress, a thin, worn thing that had come with the apartment 5 years ago, and counted the money in her wallet for the 7th time that morning. $5.37. $5.37. The rent was due in 3 days. The deposit to secure the room in the basement of Mrs. Kalinsky's house was $200. She had none of it. Outside her window, snow began to fall. Silent. Inevitable. Covering everything it touched. The supply truck lurched to a stop at the service entrance of the Bianchi Mountain Lodge, and Mia Voss climbed down onto snow that was already beginning to accumulate in thick, deliberate layers. The blizzard had arrived earlier than the weather reports promised, transforming the pine trees into silent sentinels and erasing the horizon entirely. She clutched her duffel bag to her chest, everything she owned in the world fit inside it, minus the weight of the eviction notice folded in her coat pocket. The red ink had bled slightly where her tears had fallen. 12 days. That was all she had left before the apartment that took her 8 years to afford disappeared, before she became homeless in a Seattle winter that was already turning merciless with cold. The wind cut through her coat like a blade wrapped in ice. She was thin, hollow in a way that spoke of rationed meals and missed dinners, her black uniform hanging 2 sizes too large on a frame marked by scars that burned even in the freezing air. Her hair was dark brown, pulled back severely, and her eyes, pale gray, ringed with exhaustion, scanned the service entrance with the careful attention of someone who had learned to notice exits and shadows. A woman appeared in the doorway. Mrs. Chen, the head housekeeper, was in her 60s with silver streaking her black hair and an expression that suggested she had seen 10,000 people like Mia arrive with nothing and leave the same way. She did not smile. She did not offer to carry the bag. "You are Mia Voss," she said. It was not a question. "Yes, Come. I will show you the rules of this house." Mrs. Chen walked through corridors of polished marble that reflected light like water. Oil paintings hung on every wall, portraits of men Mia did not recognize, women in jewels that cost more than her annual salary, scenes of power and legacy that made her feel like a ghost moving through someone else's life. Crystal chandeliers caught the light and threw it against cream-colored walls. The carpet beneath their feet was so thick that her footsteps made no sound at all. "The West Wing and the kitchens," Mrs. Chen said, never turning around. "You clean those areas. You arrive at 5 in the morning. You finish before the family rises. You do not speak to Mr. Bianchi or his guests. You do not stare at them. You do not exist in their presence. Is this clear?" "Yes, The East Wing is forbidden. That is where his sister stays. You will be told if you are needed there. You follow instructions without question. You clean thoroughly. You speak to no one about anything you see or hear in this house. Understood?" Mia nodded. The way she learned to survive was the way Mrs. Chen had taught her without words: keep your head down, make yourself small, become invisible. Your room is in the staff quarters downstairs. Dinner is at 6. Breakfast is at 5. The pay is $400 per week. You work 7 days. Cash, every Friday. Are you prepared to work? Yes, Thank you, Mrs. Chen finally looked at her, really looked at her, and something flickered in her expression. Recognition, perhaps. Or pity. She said nothing, only gestured down a narrow staircase that descended into the staff quarters where the light was dimmer and the air tasted like cleaning chemicals and old wood. The first day began at 5 in the morning. Mia's alarm, a wind-up clock she had owned since she was 17, chimed in the darkness of her small room, and she rose from the thin mattress with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had done this 10,000 mornings before. She changed into her black uniform in the dark, her fingers careful not to disturb the scars on her back where the fabric met raw nerve. The marble floors of the West Wing stretched for what felt like miles. She moved on her knees with a bucket of water and a cloth, her movements practiced and efficient, the way Douglas Hale had taught her to clean, thoroughly, quickly, invisibly. Do not call attention. Do not speak. Do not exist except in your usefulness. Other staff members walked past her throughout the morning. The gardener. The security guards in dark suits with earpieces. A woman in expensive clothes who smelled like jasmine perfume and dismissal. None of them looked at Mia. She was furniture. She was a shadow that moved and left no trace except the shine of clean marble. At 10 o'clock, the sound of small footsteps echoed through the corridor. A child's voice, bright and clear and unafraid, said, "Excuse me. Are you new?" Mia froze. She did not look up. The rule was clear: do not speak to the family. But the child continued, unconcerned by protocol. "I'm Emma. I'm 8 years old. I cannot see but I can hear very well. You sound sad. Are you sad?" Mia's hand stilled in the water bucket. The child was being led by a caretaker in a white uniform, a woman whose face immediately registered alarm. "Miss Emma, you should not bother the staff." "She is not bothering me," Emma said simply. She held a white cane in her small hand, moving it gently against the floor to understand her surroundings. Her eyes were light blue but unfocused, looking at something beyond the visible world. "What is your name?" Something cracked in Mia's chest, a sensation so small and so devastating that she almost gasped. No one had asked her name in weeks. When you are invisible, you have no name. "Mia," she whispered. "Mia is a beautiful name. My mother had a friend named Mia. She was kind." Emma tilted her head, listening. "You have a kind voice. I can tell these things even though I cannot see." The caretaker gently took Emma's arm. "Come, Miss Emma. Let's continue to the library. Goodbye, Mia, Emma called back as she was led away. I hope you are not sad tomorrow. The child's voice faded down the corridor, leaving Mia still kneeling on the marble floor, her hands shaking in the bucket of water. That night, in her small room in the staff quarters, Mia unfolded the eviction notice under the dim light of a single bulb. The paper was thin and yellow, the kind of legal document that comes from machines rather than human hands. She traced the numbers with her finger, doing the mathematics for the 100th time. $22,000. 12 days. Now 11. At $400 per week, she made about $57 per day. She had already spent $200 that week on food and utilities. She had $5 in her pocket. In 11 days, even if she worked without sleeping, even if she earned every single penny and touched nothing else, she could earn perhaps $3,000. $3,000 toward $22,000. The gap between the number and her reality was the distance between heaven and earth. She pulled her nightshirt over her head and turned to examine the scars in the mirror mounted on the wall. They ran in every direction, across her shoulders, down her spine, in patterns that looked like someone had mapped the landscape of suffering across her back. Douglas Hale had been very careful to leave marks that would be hidden by clothes. He had been very precise with his cruelty. His voice echoed in her memory, "You will never be worth saving, Mia. Do not even try. No one will want you. No one will help you. You are broken. You are nothing." She touched one of the older scars, the one from when she was 22 and had tried to leave the first time. The muscle memory of that pain shot through her nerve endings, and she flinched. She folded the eviction notice carefully and placed it back in her pocket. Then she lay on the thin mattress and stared at the ceiling, listening to the sound of wind against the basement window, the sound of snow falling in the darkness outside, the sound of silence that was so complete it felt like drowning. 3 blocks away, in the security office of the Bianchi Mountain Lodge, a man named Sergio watched 23 camera feeds simultaneously across multiple screens. He was broad-shouldered and dark-haired, wearing a suit that fit him the way a weapon fits a soldier's hand, perfectly, without hesitation. Nicholas Bianchi stood behind him, his eyes fixed on one particular screen. The camera showed the marble floor of the West Wing, and in the frame, a young woman knelt with a bucket of water, her movements careful and broken, the way someone cleans who has learned that invisibility is survival. "Install 2 more cameras in the staff quarters," Nicholas said, his voice deep and solid like an oath. "And 3 in the East Wing, near my sister's room. I want to know every movement, every breath. Every person who comes within 10 feet of Emma. Of course, boss. But I should mention, we already have excellent security. This level of surveillance. Do it, Sergio." Sergio did not question him further. He had worked for Nicholas Bianchi for 11 years, and in all that time, he had learned that the man did not repeat himself. He moved to the keyboard and began typing commands that would activate the new camera installations throughout the lodge. What neither man knew, what no one could have predicted in that moment, was that the young woman cleaning the marble floors would become the reason everything changed. That the scars on her back would become a mirror for the man who had learned to measure loyalty in moments of choosing. That the child who could not see would be the first to recognize something true in a world built on lies. But that knowledge existed only in the future, still hours away, still unfolding in the darkness like snow falling on mountains that had never been touched by kindness. For now, there was only the sound of wind, the accumulation of snow, and Mia Voss lying alone in a basement room, counting the days until she became homeless in a city that had already forgotten her name. The silence swallowed the room like the lid of a coffin being sealed. Mia Voss knelt on the marble floor, her black uniform hanging loose on her frame, a bucket of grey water trembling in her hands as 3 armed men surrounded the boy she barely knew, their voices dropping low, their hands moving toward weapons. Marco, the kitchen worker with the stutter, had already given everything he could give, his last paycheck, his dignity, his will to resist. The men wanted information. They wanted an address. They wanted a girl. The tall one, scarred from eye to cheekbone, smiled like a blade wrapped in ice. "Where is she?" His voice tasted like venom. And in that moment, Mia did something that would change everything. She stood. The bucket clattered to the marble. Water spread across the floor like spilled blood. Her voice came out steady, which was a miracle because her hands were trembling so violently she could barely hold them still. "Leave him alone." The man laughed. "The maid wants to play hero." But he did not know what was happening on the cameras, 17 screens in a security room 2 floors above, all of them suddenly alive with movement, a man in a charcoal suit and white shirt standing abruptly from his chair, his eyes fixed on monitor 7, something cold and dangerous stirring in his chest like a blade being drawn from a sheath. Nicholas Bianchi was not a man who allowed threats to linger. Now, let us go back to the beginning to understand how we arrived at this moment. How a woman with $5 and an eviction notice stamped in red ink, 12 days away from homelessness, would become the reason a mafia boss dismantled the carefully controlled walls he had built around his heart. How a blind child would speak a truth that no one else could see. How a man who had learned to measure loyalty in blood would discover that some kinds of courage lived in the most unexpected places. 48 hours earlier, before the blizzard sealed the roads, before the men with guns arrived, before everything changed, Mia was counting her money on the edge of a twin bed in a basement room that smelled like mildew and broken promises. $5.17. That was all that remained. The eviction notice lay on the nightstand, the deadline circled in red pen so violent it looked like a threat. 12 days. 12 days to find $22,000 or lose the apartment on Morrison Street, the only place she had felt remotely safe in 8 years. The letter from the landlord was clinical, professional, utterly devoid of mercy, due to failure to pay rent for the past 3 months totaling $22,000, you are hereby notified. Mia had read it 17 times. The number did not change. The deadline did not soften. $22,000. It might as well have been $22 million. She folded the $5.17 back into her wallet, a thing of cracked leather that had belonged to someone else once, found in a donation bin, and lay back on the bed, staring at the water stain spreading across the ceiling like a map of territory she would never visit. Her phone buzzed. A text from the agency, double shift available tomorrow, Seattle, live-in position, 3 days, luxury property, $800 total, transportation provided. $800. That was $7,995 short of the deadline. But $800 was better than the zero she would have if she did not work. Mia texted back immediately, "I accept." Then she lay in the darkness and waited for morning to arrive like it was something that could still hurt her. The black SUV came at 6 in the morning. Mia was waiting on the curb, her belongings in a canvas bag, her work uniform already creased and pressed. The driver did not speak. She did not expect him to. For the 3-hour drive north toward the Cascade Mountains, toward a property she had never heard of, Mia watched the city give way to forest, watched the forest give way to sky, and tried not to think about what would happen when the 12 days were over. The lodge appeared through the rain like something from a dream, except Mia had stopped believing in dreams 8 years ago. 3 stories of stone and glass, positioned on a mountainside overlooking nothing but more mountains, more forest, more emptiness. Expensive emptiness. The kind that cost more than her entire life added together. Sergio met her at the service entrance. He was tall, dark-eyed, with the bearing of a man who was accustomed to giving orders and having them obeyed. He looked her up and down in a way that made her want to disappear. "You're the new maid. Standard duties. Kitchen, west wing, service areas. Do not go into the private quarters. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do you understand?" "Yes." "Yes, what?" "Yes, sir." Sergio nodded once and walked away, his footsteps echoing on the marble floors. Mia stood in the service hallway, holding her canvas bag, breathing in the smell of expensive wood polish and money, and tried to make herself smaller. She was very good at making herself smaller. The first shift lasted 14 hours. Mia cleaned every surface of the West Wing, her hands moving in mechanical patterns, counting the money she was earning in her head. 14 hours at approximately $57 per hour, not including meals, which meant her real rate was closer to $45 per hour. She would need 274 more shifts at this rate to earn $22,000. The math was simple. The timeline was not. On her second shift, while she was arranging linens in a hallway on the second floor, she heard a voice that stopped her completely. "Is someone there?" The voice belonged to a child, young, curious, unafraid. Mia turned. A girl of approximately 7 or 8 stood in an open doorway, her eyes moving across the hallway without quite focusing on anything. Her hair fell in dark waves to her shoulders. She wore a pink sweater and small socks with no shoes. And she was looking directly at Mia while not looking at all. "Just me, miss. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to disturb you." The girl smiled. "You smell like lavender soap. The kind my mother used to use. A long time ago." She paused, her head tilting slightly. "What is your name?" "Mia." "I'm Emma. My brother owns this place. He does not like it when people make a lot of noise. But you are quiet. You move like someone who is trying not to be noticed." Emma's small face was serious in a way that made her seem much older than 8. "Is that because someone taught you to hide?" The question landed like a punch. Mia's hands trembled. "No. I mean, yes. I mean," she stopped. "I should return to work." But Emma's caretaker had already appeared, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, gently taking the girl's hand. "Come, Emma. Your brother said you could rest before lunch." As they moved away, Emma spoke over her shoulder, "Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing it anyway." The girl said it like she was quoting something she had learned long ago, like she was trying to teach Mia a lesson encoded in simple words. That same afternoon, in the security room on the 3rd floor, Nicholas Bianchi stood watching 17 screens display the lodge in perfect high-definition detail. His man Sergio stood beside him, tablet in hand, reporting on the camera installation progress. Nicholas Bianchi was 42 years old but looked older, the way men look older when they have spent years calculating the exact measurement of human betrayal. He wore a charcoal suit tailored so precisely it seemed to be part of his actual body. His shirt was white and open at the collar. A gold watch from his wrist caught the light. It cost more than most people's cars. His hair was dark, silvered at the temples, combed back from a face that had never learned how to smile and mean it. The scar running from his eye to his cheekbone was a souvenir from his past. The hardness in his gaze was a souvenir from his brother. 2 years ago, Marco Bianchi had sold family intelligence to the Valdez cartel. He had done it to save himself from gambling debts, to save himself from ruin. Instead, he had saved himself into a permanent disappearance. Nicholas did not speak about his brother. He did not think about his brother. What he did was build walls, walls of surveillance, walls of information, walls of complete and total control. "Install additional cameras in the staff quarters," Nicholas said, his voice deep and solid like an oath. 2 more in the West Wing. 3 in the East Wing, near Emma's room. "I want to see every movement. Every breath." Sergio hesitated for exactly 1 second. "Of course, boss. Though I should mention, our security is all ready." "Do it, Sergio." The technicians arrived that evening with equipment in black cases. They worked through the night while Nicholas sat alone in the security room, watching screens flicker to life one by one, watching the lodge become a thing of perfect visibility. 100% observation. 0 surprises. Except surprises, Nicholas was about to discover, sometimes install themselves through the simple act of someone being brave in the exact moment when bravery was required. On the 3rd morning, the blizzard had sealed the roads. Snow fell in sheets so thick they erased the world beyond the lodge windows. The forecast said the storm would last another 36 hours at minimum. The staff who had not been sleeping in the lodge were trapped in Seattle. The staff who were inside were trapped here. And inside the lodge was a blind child whose protection was the only thing Nicholas Bianchi cared about anymore. That was when the men came. They arrived in two dark vehicles that skidded slightly on the snow-covered drive, their tires gripping and releasing, gripping and releasing. They wore tactical gear that did not quite match official police uniforms. 3 of them moved through the service entrance at approximately 2:19 in the afternoon, their boots leaving wet prints on the marble floor, their eyes scanning the hallway with the precision of men who were accustomed to taking what they wanted. The tall one, scarred from eye to cheekbone, found Marco in the kitchen trying to pretend that he was simply preparing dinner. He pushed the boy against the wall so hard the impact sent plates cascading into the sink, shattering on impact, the sound of it like small screams. "Where is the girl?" His voice was cold enough to freeze blood. "The young one. We know she's here." "Which room?" Marco stammered. Marco tried to lie. Marco tried everything except the one thing that would have saved him. He tried to be brave alone. That was when the bucket hit the marble. Mia stood between the armed men and Marco, her uniform soaked from splashed water, her hands visibly trembling, her voice steady like she was speaking from somewhere beyond fear. "Leave him alone." The tall man smiled. The smile was the worst part. It was the smile of someone who believed that fear was the only currency that mattered, that courage was just a word that meant nothing, that the world belonged entirely to people willing to hurt. "The maid wants to play hero." He took one step toward her, his hand moving to his waistband. That was the exact second Nicholas saw it on monitor 7. He did not think. The men who worked for Nicholas Bianchi had learned long ago that when he moved, and they asked questions only after the operation was complete. Sergio was already drawing his weapon. Luca was already radioing the perimeter. By the time Nicholas's feet hit the service stairs, 6 of his men were already moving, their guns drawn, their movement silent like smoke. They disarmed Hale's operatives in approximately 47 seconds. They forced all 3 men to their knees on the marble floor, their weapons pointed at the back of their skulls with the kind of precision that suggested these were not men who missed. The tall man who had smiled at Mia was now crying quietly, his scar seeming to pulse with terror. Nicholas walked past all of them. He walked past Sergio. He walked past Luca, whose eyes widened with something like shock. He walked directly to Mia, who was trembling so violently she could barely stand upright, her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold her own pieces together. "Are you hurt?" His voice was different than she expected, quiet, precise, like every word was carefully measured before it was released. Mia shook her head. "You did not run," Nicholas said. It was not a question. It was an observation of something remarkable, something that had apparently not happened in his presence in a very long time. "He was scared," Mia whispered. Nicholas's jaw tightened. He turned to Sergio without breaking eye contact with Mia. "Find out who sent them. Find out everything. And get her cleaned up. She is shaking." In 15 years of working for Nicholas Bianchi, Sergio had never heard his boss speak that way about staff. Luca made eye contact with another lieutenant across the kitchen, a look that said something fundamental had just shifted in the equilibrium of the world. 1 hour later, Nicholas sat in his office reviewing footage when Sergio entered with a file folder the color of smoke. The security camera footage was playing on 3 screens behind his desk, Mia standing between armed men, her voice steady despite her terror. Nicholas had watched it 4 times already. "The girl," Sergio said, placing the file on the desk. "Mia Voss. Found some history." What was in that file was a portrait of a life lived in increments of survival. Employment records showing 7 jobs in 8 years, each one abandoned quickly, no pattern except the pattern of running. A sealed police report from Portland dating back 8 years, her name redacted, but the incident code indicating trafficking investigation. And a hospital intake photograph that Nicholas studied for 37 seconds without speaking. In the photograph, Mia Voss was turned away from the camera, her back visible, marked with scars that ran in every direction like a map drawn by someone who believed pain was a language worth speaking fluently. "What is this?" Nicholas's hands had gone still on the photograph. Sergio's voice was careful. "Douglas Hale. Human trafficker. Operates between Seattle and Portland. He had her for 6 years. She escaped 8 years ago. He has been looking for her since. Nicholas looked up. Why now? Sergio placed another photograph on the desk. Victoria Ashford, elegant in pearls at a charity gala, her smile containing zero warmth. His partner. She finds the women. Targets them at their lowest, offers help, traps them in debt. She located Mia working here. Wants her back. Says women who escape are examples that threaten the entire operation. Nicholas was quiet for such a long time that Sergio began to wonder if he had heard the question at all. When he finally spoke, his voice had dropped to something that sounded like ice. Where is Mia now? Staff quarters. But boss, she is just a maid. If we get involved in this. Where is Mia? Staff quarters, 3rd floor, room 7. Nicholas stood. The men who worked for him had learned that this particular movement, standing with such deliberate slowness, preceded decisions that changed the landscape of the city. Sergio stepped backward, leaving space for the man to move. Mia was sitting on the edge of the bed when Nicholas knocked, still in her soaked uniform, still trembling, the eviction notice clutched in her hands like it was a piece of her actual heart. When he entered, she tried to stand, but he gestured for her to remain sitting. He sat down in the chair across from the bed. Outside the window, the blizzard continued its assault on the world. The men from earlier, Nicholas said. You knew what they were. Mia nodded slowly. But you stepped in front of them anyway. In front of the boy. You risked your life. He paused. I know who Douglas Hale is. I know what he does. I know that you escaped from him 8 years ago. Mia's eyes filled with tears immediately. Please. I will leave tonight. I will not bring trouble here. I just need. Stop. Nicholas's voice was firm but not cruel. You are not leaving. Not in this blizzard. Not with those men looking for you. You are under my protection now. Mia stared at him like he was speaking another language. Why would you help me? I am nobody. Just a maid. I have nothing to offer you. Nicholas leaned forward. My brother betrayed me 2 years ago. Sold my family to our enemies. For the past 2 years, I have believed that loyalty is a weakness. That trust is just another way to get destroyed. He paused. Then I watched you on those cameras. You had every reason to run. Every reason to protect yourself. But you stood between armed men and a boy you barely knew because he was scared. His voice dropped further. You reminded me that courage is not the absence of fear. It is acting despite it. Mia was shaking. He won't stop. Victoria Ashford, she has money, connections, she has no idea who she is threatening, Nicholas said, and his voice had become something that sounded like a blade being drawn. The rain would come later. For now, there was only snow, and the sound of the blizzard tearing at the windows, and 2 people sitting in silence while the world outside froze solid, unaware that the world inside was about to burn. The snow fell harder as midnight approached, and Nicholas Bianchi stood in the security room watching the monitors with the stillness of a man who had learned to measure moments in blood and consequence. The green-tinted screen showed everything, the lodge perimeter, the forest beyond, the access roads that led toward the south. On monitor 7, movement. Headlights cutting through the blizzard. 6 vehicles, black, unmarked, approaching with deliberate speed. Douglas Hale had come to collect what he believed was still his. Nicholas's men stood motionless around him, Sergio with his scarred jaw, Luca with his hand resting on the desk, each one understanding without words that the world was about to shift. The clock on the wall read 11:13 p.m. The temperature outside had dropped to 14 degrees Fahrenheit. The blizzard showed no sign of breaking. How long? Nicholas asked, his voice like stone dropped into still water. 7 minutes until they reached the east perimeter, Sergio answered. 8 more until they hit the service entrance. Nicholas nodded once. He had spent the last 12 hours making phone calls, calling in debts that stretched across 5 states. The Valdez family in California had been waiting 2 years for the man who intercepted their shipment. The Russian syndicate in Portland had an outstanding contract on Hale's head. And the FBI field office in Seattle had received an anonymous tip about a trafficking network that operated with the precision of a perfectly programmed machine: names, dates, account numbers, everything they needed to dismantle Victoria Ashford's empire in a single coordinated strike. But first, Douglas Hale. "Deploy teams 1 through 4, Nicholas said quietly. "I want him alive. For now." The earpieces crackled. Sergio and Luca exchanged a glance, not one of doubt, but of recognition. In 15 years of working for Nicholas Bianchi, they had never seen him move like this. Not for business. Not for territory. For something personal. 3 blocks away, in the staff quarters of the lodge, Mia Voss stood at the window watching the snow fall like ash from a burning sky. Her hands pressed against the cold glass. Emma slept in the room next door, breathing the easy breath of a child who had no idea that danger was approaching through the forest. She thought about Nicholas's words on the balcony, about his brother, about jumping away from everything that mattered. She thought about how close she had come to that final step, how the snow beneath her feet had felt like the edge of the world. Then she heard it, the distant sound of engines, growing louder, cutting through the wind. Her heart stopped. She did not know that 12 men in black tactical gear were already moving through the forest like wolves closing in on prey. She did not know that Nicholas had given orders to end this tonight, to erase the threat that had followed her to his door. She only knew that the sound meant danger, and that she had to protect Emma. Mia ran. On monitor 4, the camera caught the moment Nicholas's first team breached the tree line. Thermal imaging showed bodies moving in perfect synchronization, years of training compressed into seconds of execution. The vehicle slowed. The men inside reached for their weapons. They never got the chance. The first vehicle's windows exploded inward with simultaneous precision. 2 gunshots, no more. The driver slumped. The passenger door was ripped open. A man in black reached in and dragged the occupant out into the snow. Flashbangs on the second vehicle, Nicholas commanded. The lodge vibrated from the concussion. On 3 different monitors, the world went white for a heartbeat, then grey smoke poured across the snow. When the images cleared, Hale's men were on the ground, weapons scattered, bodies zip-tied with professional efficiency. Douglas Hale himself was in the lead SUV, screaming into a radio that no longer functioned, clutching a pistol with a trembling hand. He had not heard the sniper teams take position on the ridge. He had not seen the net closing around him until the moment his door exploded inward and 2 massive men in tactical gear dragged him into the frozen night. He collapsed in the snow. His voice cracked like thin ice breaking. Wait, we can make a deal. I have money, I have information." Nicholas walked out of the lodge in a grey cashmere coat that cost more than Hale had paid for weapons in the last year. The cold air cut against his face. His footsteps were measured, deliberate, the sound of each heel striking the frozen ground echoing across the white expanse like a countdown to judgment. He crouched in front of Hale, who was trembling like a cornered animal caught in lamplight. "You made 2 mistakes, Nicholas said, his voice so quiet it seemed to come from inside the snow itself. "First, you touched someone under my protection. Second, you threatened my sister." Hale's eyes were wide, searching for mercy. He found none. "Victoria Ashford set this up," Hale gasped. "She said you would negotiate," she said. "I know," Nicholas interrupted. He stood. "Sergio." Sergio stepped forward, and something in his smile was not merciful. "The Valdez family has been looking for the man who intercepted their shipment from 2 years ago," Sergio said conversationally. "The one your network stole. I made some phone calls. I told them we found him." The color drained from Hale's face. The Valdez family did not negotiate. The Valdez family did not bargain. The Valdez family understood only consequence. "No," Hale whispered. "No, please, not them." "Drag him away," Nicholas said, turning back toward the lodge. The screaming that followed echoed through the forest for exactly 43 seconds. Then it stopped. Then there was only wind and snow and the sound of engines starting in the distance. Meanwhile, 240 miles south, Victoria Ashford stood in her hotel penthouse suite, champagne glass in hand, watching the news cycle on 3 different screens. Market reports. Weather updates. A story about a minor legal dispute in Portland. Nothing about Seattle. Nothing about interference. She smiled. The knock on her door came at dawn, exactly when her certainty was at its peak. She opened it in her silk robe, already forming apologies and explanations, and saw the badge. FBI. Victoria Ashford, you are under arrest for human trafficking, money laundering, racketeering, and conspiracy to commit violence, the agent said, her voice flat as a blade. You have the right to remain silent. Victoria's carefully constructed world collapsed in real time. The champagne glass slipped from her fingers. The second agent was already reading her rights, already producing handcuffs, already walking her toward the door where cameras waited and photographers screamed questions and her future crumbled into ash. The news footage showed her being led into a federal building, her designer clothes somehow looking shabby under the fluorescent lights, her face twisted with rage and disbelief. 40 years without parole. The foundation raided. Assets frozen. Every woman she had controlled released, every debt erased, every name she had destroyed finally hearing the words not guilty anymore. Death would have been too quick. Too easy. Too merciful. Nicholas had wanted systematic destruction. He had gotten it. Back at the lodge, Mia stood with Emma in the kitchen, the child's small hand gripping hers, both of them listening to the silence that now seemed to fill the entire building. She could not process what was happening, could not arrange the pieces into something that made sense. Nicholas appeared in the doorway with Sergio behind him, both men unchanged, as if they had simply been checking the perimeter instead of ending a war. It is finished, Nicholas said quietly. Mia could not speak. Emma looked up at her and said, the bad man is gone now. Her voice was clear, certain, unstoppable in its innocence. Now you can stay. Nicholas's eyes moved to Mia, and in that moment, his expression shifted. Not softness, he was not capable of softness the way other men understood it. But something else. Something like the moment before dawn, when the darkness finally agrees to release the world. She can stay, he said. If she wants to. Mia's hand shook as she held Emma's hand in the kitchen light. The $22,000 that Nicholas had placed in her account would clear the eviction notice. The 12-day deadline written in red ink was no longer a death sentence. Hale was gone. Victoria was imprisoned. The threat had been erased with the precision of a surgeon removing scar tissue. But as she looked at Nicholas, she understood something that would not fully crystallize until much later, that in protecting her, he had changed something inside himself. And that change would become the most dangerous thing either of them had ever faced. Because love, in a man like Nicholas Bianchi, was not the opposite of violence. It was simply another kind of consequence. The news would carry the story for 3 weeks, federal raids, arrests, the dismantling of a trafficking network that had operated for 8 years. But none of the reports would mention the man who had orchestrated it. Nicholas Bianchi was careful. He moved through the world like a ghost, faithful, invisible, unstoppable. And as the new year approached, as the blizzard finally broke and Seattle emerged into clear winter light, he stood on the balcony of his penthouse in the rain-washed evening, watching the city lights reflect off wet pavement, and thought about the night that a maid in a black uniform had stood between armed men and a frightened boy. He did not know then that this would be the moment his life divided into before and after. He would know very soon. 1 year later, the ballroom of the Seattle Grand glittered with the kind of light that only money and intention could create. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen stars above a sea of champagne flutes and black tie shoulders. A banner stretched across the far wall in silver letters, Emma Bianchi Foundation for Children's Recovery. Mia Voss stood in the marble foyer, her hand trembling as she held the invitation, reading the embossed text for the 100th time. She had not planned to come. For 12 months, she had built a life that carefully did not intersect with his world. She had finished her degree at night while working days at the women's shelter. She had started speaking at conferences about trauma recovery, her voice steady now when she told her story to rooms of social workers and therapists and survivors who recognized themselves in her words. She had moved into a small apartment on Capitol Hill with windows that faced east, where the morning sun reached her first thing each day. She had paid back every dollar of the $22,000 Nicholas left for her, though it took her 7 months of double shifts and careful accounting. The money was no longer a debt. It was a wound slowly closing. But the invitation had come 2 weeks ago, and it had stayed on her kitchen counter, unopened, until yesterday when she finally let herself read it. A charity gala. A children's hospital. Emma's foundation. Emma Bianchi, who was now 9 years old and did not remember being the frightened 4-year-old girl in a mountain lodge during a blizzard. Emma, who Nicholas had adopted formally, officially, making her his heir in the eyes of the law and his heart in the eyes of everyone who worked for him. The simple black dress Mia wore had cost $437. She had spent 3 days saving for it after she decided to attend. The price had shocked her, $437 for a single piece of fabric, but she had thought about Nicholas's cashmere coat, the one that hung on him like it cost more than her entire annual salary 5 years ago. She had bought the dress as an act of reclaiming her right to choose beauty for herself. Not to impress him. For herself. The ballroom doors opened before her, and warmth escaped, the smell of roasted salmon and garlic, the sound of laughter that had not yet become mechanical, the low murmur of Seattle's medical elite and philanthropists and people with enough power to make things happen by simply deciding they should happen. Mia moved through the crowd like a ghost. She had learned this skill in her year as a maid in his house, the art of being present without being seen. She watched Emma across the room, the girl's dark hair arranged in a careful braid, wearing a champagne-colored dress, laughing with her caretaker as she pointed at the dessert table. Emma was no longer afraid of loud noises. Emma no longer flinched when doors opened suddenly. Nicholas had done that, had taken the broken pieces of a child and made her whole again. And Mia realized, watching her, that she had done the same for herself. The balcony overlooked the city lights of Seattle spreading out like a circuit board of human intention. Rain-slicked streets reflected neon and gold. Space Needle rose in the distance, elegant and useless and beautiful. Mia stepped outside without planning to, needing air that was not thick with perfume and expectation. She did not hear him approach. That was always his way, he moved like consequence, arriving before you knew departure had already happened. You look different. Mia turned. Nicholas Bianchi stood 3 feet away in a black suit that fit him like it had been sewn directly onto his body. He looked exactly the same except for everything. His eyes held less ice. His shoulders seemed to carry less weight. There was a tiredness in his face that suggested he had been asking himself difficult questions, the kind that do not resolve into easy answers. "So do you," Mia said. Her voice caught between the words, betraying her. "I watched you speak last month. At the conference on trauma recovery. Sergio sent me the video." Nicholas's hands rested at his sides, and she noticed for the first time that his right hand bore a thin white scar across the knuckles, new, or at least healed since she had last seen him. "You were there." Mia's chest constricted. "No. But I wanted to be." He paused, and in that pause, she heard the weight of a year's worth of distance. "For 12 months I have told myself that protecting you was about justice. About stopping predators. About proving that loyalty still exists in a world that believes it has been erased." His eyes found hers now, dark and direct. "But that is not the whole truth." "What is the truth?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Nicholas stepped closer, and she could smell him, expensive cologne and rain and something underneath that was simply him. "The truth is that when I saw you on those camera screens, standing between armed men and someone weaker, I saw something I thought my brother had destroyed in me years ago. Proof that courage is real. That selflessness exists. That some people are worth the risk of trusting." His voice dropped lower, becoming raw in a way she had never heard. The truth is that you changed my life by reminding me what it means to protect something beyond myself. And I have spent a year trying to find the courage you showed in that moment to tell you that." Mia's eyes filled with tears. She had not planned for this. The past year had been constructed carefully to avoid this exact scene, this proximity, this honesty, this vulnerability from a man who had been taught by violence to never show his hand. "You saved my life," she said. "You saved mine first." He reached out slowly, his hand hovering in the space between them like a question. She did not pull away. Instead, she took his hand, and the feel of his skin, warm, real, scarred, made her entire body remember what her mind had been trying to forget. "I do not know what happens next," he said. "But I know I am tired of watching you from a distance." "Then stop watching," Mia whispered. "And stay." He did. 6 months later, the office on the 4th floor of the building on Mercer Island overlooked the Sound. Cameras that Nicholas had once installed for surveillance had been repurposed entirely. Now they watched over safe houses scattered across the Pacific Northwest. The Bianchi Foundation for Children's Recovery had quietly become one of the most effective trafficking intervention organizations in the region. Nobody knew the true source of its funding. Nobody asked questions about the man who appeared in no photographs, whose name appeared on no board of directors, but whose influence moved through the operation like blood through a body. Mia worked there now as the director of survivor advocacy. She wore professional clothes that she had chosen herself, linen blazers in cream and gray, dresses without long sleeves that covered scars. She wore her scars now like they belonged there, because they did. The thin white lines on her wrists and ribs and the map across her back had become evidence of survival rather than shame. Nicholas sat across from her at the conference table, reviewing footage from one of the safe houses in Tacoma. A girl had just aged out of foster care and enrolled in their program. They were watching her orientation, seeing her shoulders slowly release their tension as she realized no one would hurt her here. "She reminds me of you," Nicholas said quietly. "How old?" 22. Mia nodded. 22 was the age she had been when Douglas Hale had first found her at the diner in Ballard, when he had promised her stability and delivered hell. 22 was the age when you still believed that promises meant something, that men could be trusted, that love did not require chains. Emma visited the office every Saturday after school. She was 10 now, confident in a way that suggested she had never learned fear. She would sit at the desk in Nicholas's private office and draw pictures, detailed, intricate sketches of the city, the Sound, the safe houses she knew were special but did not fully understand. She called Mia by her first name now, not Ms. Voss like she had for the first year. They had taken a family trip to the mountain lodge the previous winter, and Emma had insisted on sleeping in the staff quarters where Mia had once worked, saying she wanted to see where Mia had been brave. Nicholas had agreed, though Mia had seen the shadow that crossed his face. He had burned the security footage from those days. She knew because she had asked him to, and he had said, "Already done." On a Tuesday evening in late autumn, they sat together in the apartment Mia now shared with Nicholas, a penthouse on 4th Avenue that overlooked Pike Place Market and the water beyond. The furniture had been selected carefully, a blending of her taste and his, neither one dominating. The kitchen was full of light. The bedroom had windows on 2 sides. There were no cameras. There was no surveillance. There was only the ordinary machinery of a life being built together. They were sorting through photographs from Emma's birthday party, 10 years old, double digits, the girl insisting on the mountain lodge again, wanting to make the place sacred instead of haunted. The photographs showed her laughing, Nicholas attempting to braid her hair, Mia and Emma with their heads together like they had always belonged to each other. "Do you still need the cameras?" Mia asked quietly. She was looking at a still image from the security monitor in the corner of the birthday photos, the camera feed showing the scene from another angle, capturing Emma's joy, Nicholas's rare smile, Mia's hand in his. He considered. Outside, the city lights were beginning to glow as evening approached. Rain had started to fall, gentle and patient. "No," he said finally. "But I keep them anyway. To remember." "Remember what?" That sometimes the people who save us are the ones we almost missed. The invisible ones. The ones cleaning floors and keeping their heads down and standing up anyway when it matters. He turned to face her. That sometimes the most dangerous man in the city can learn to be gentle. That sometimes broken people become each other's healing. Mia leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. His arm came around her naturally, like it had always belonged there. Sometimes the cameras meant to watch for threats reveal the courage hiding in plain sight. Sometimes darkness needs someone willing to stand between it and the innocent. Sometimes invisible suffering ends not because someone rescues you, but because someone sees you, really sees you, and believes you are worth saving. After the rain, the sky clears. And sometimes miracles come from the most unexpected places. If this story moved your heart, drop a like and subscribe for more stories like this every single day. Share this with someone you love. And remember, you are never invisible. Someone sees your courage, even when you do not. Comment below, what would you have done in Mia's position? We read every single one. New story tomorrow. You will not want to miss it. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.